Chapter 1: The Pull of Wonder. She had been watching a particular region of space for some time now. It was not remarkable at first glance, just another section of the viewport filled with stars, some bright, some dim, scattered across the darkness in patterns that seemed random but were not. She had looked at regions like this many times before, but something about this one held her attention. Ari sat in the observation chair, her hands resting loosely in her lap. Her breathing was slow and even. The ship hummed its familiar hum in the background, a sound so constant now that she barely noticed it unless she chose to. The stars in this region moved in particular ways. She could not see the movement directly, it was far too slow for that, but the ship's instruments had tracked their positions over time, building a map of motion that revealed something she could not observe with her eyes alone. They orbited, all of them, moving in smooth, coordinated paths around a center that appeared to be empty. There was nothing visible there, no bright star, no glowing nebula, just darkness, quiet and still, while everything around it moved in response to something she could not see. She found that beautiful, not in a way that demanded explanation, not in a way that created urgency or unease, just beautiful in the quiet, patient way that mysteries often were, the universe showing her something without insisting she understand it immediately. She had always been drawn to questions like this. Even as a child, even back on Earth, she had loved the feeling of wondering. Not the frantic need to know, but the gentle pull of curiosity. The awareness that there were things she did not understand, and that was fine. That not knowing was part of the experience. Humans had always wondered, she thought. It was something fundamental, not a flaw or a failing, but a quality, a way of being in the world, or in this case, in the universe. She remembered reading once that ancient peoples had looked up at the night sky and asked questions. Where did the stars come from? What held them in place? Why did they move the way they did? Those questions had no answers then, and yet people asked them anyway, not because they expected immediate resolution, but because the wondering itself mattered. Curiosity did not require answers. It could simply exist, patient and sustained, accompanying you through life like a quiet companion. She looked at the empty center of this region again, the place where nothing glowed, but everything around it moved as though responding to a presence. The instruments suggested mass there, significant mass, but it did not announce itself the way stars did, with light and heat and visibility. It simply was. And that was enough to shape the motion of everything nearby. She did not feel compelled to name it yet. She did not need to understand its mechanics or explain how it worked. She just needed to notice, to sit with the awareness that something was there, even if she could not see it, to let the question rest without demanding an answer. The stars waved in their slow orbits, patient, unhurried. They had been moving this way for so long, She could not imagine it. Thousands of years, millions perhaps, and they would continue moving long after she had passed through this region, their paths unchanged, their motion shaped by the invisible presence at the center. She thought about wonder again, the way it felt different from fear or alarm. Wonder was gentle. It invited you closer rather than pushing you away. It said, "Here is something you do not understand, and that is interesting, and you are welcome to stay and observe as long as you like." Fear said, "Here is something you do not understand, and you must figure it out immediately, or something terrible will happen." But she did not feel fear when she looked at this region of space. She felt curiosity, the same quiet, sustained curiosity she had felt as a child lying on her back in a field, looking up at stars she could not name, asking questions she did not expect to answer. The universe was full of things she did not understand. That had always been true, and it would remain true for her entire life, no matter how much she learned. There would always be more questions than answers, more mystery than certainty. And that was not a problem to solve. It was simply the way things were. She let her breath move in and out, slow and steady. The ship carried her forward through space. The stars continued their patient orbits around the unseen center, and she sat here, watching, wondering, held by the same gentle curiosity that had always been part of her. Some questions did not demand answers. Some mysteries were meant to be noticed, appreciated, and allowed to remain. She was comfortable with that. The pull of wonder was not a force that dragged you toward danger. It was an invitation, a gentle offering. The universe saying, "Here is something beautiful and strange, and you are welcome to look as long as you like, and it is fine if you never fully understand." She accepted the invitation. She would look, she would notice, she would let the questions settle into her awareness without demanding resolution, and that would be enough. After a time she did not measure. She rose from the chair, slowly, carefully, and made her way back through the dim corridors toward the galley, where she could prepare something warm and grounding, a small ritual to anchor the cycle. Chapter 2: Knowing Without Seeing. She had been thinking about the ways people knew things. Not all knowledge came from seeing. Not all understanding required direct observation. Sometimes you learned about something by watching how other things responded to it, by noticing effects rather than causes, by trusting that patterns revealed presence even when presence remained invisible. Ari sat at the navigation console, her hand resting lightly on its edge. The screen showed the same region of space she had been observing from the window, the one with the empty center and the stars moving in their patient orbits around it. But now the display showed something more. Lines traced across the darkness, mapping the paths those stars followed, curves and arcs that bent in smooth, predictable ways. The kind of motion that suggested something was there, even though nothing appeared in the center. She studied the patterns quietly. There was no urgency to her attention, just calm interest. The same gentle curiosity that had drawn her to this region in the first place. The stars moved as though held by something, as though responding to a pull they could not escape, not because they were trapped, but because that was simply how motion worked when mass was present. They followed the paths their velocity and the surrounding gravity created for them. But what created the gravity if nothing visible was there? She let the question rest without demanding an answer. She was simply noticing, observing, letting the pattern reveal itself. Humans had done this before, she remembered, long before she was born, long before anyone had seen what she was looking at now. People had understood it was there. They had watched stars move in precisely these ways, orbiting, following curves that bent around emptiness. And they had known, not from seeing the thing itself, but from seeing everything around it respond. It was like watching wind move through grass. You could not see the wind, but you could see the grass bend and sway, and from that motion you understood the wind was real. You trusted the effect to reveal the cause. She thought about trust, the way knowledge often required it. You trusted that patterns meant something, that effects revealed causes, that the universe followed rules even when you could not observe those rules directly, and the universe had rewarded that trust. When people had looked at regions like this one, places where stars orbited empty centers, they had proposed ideas. They had suggested that something must be there, something with mass, something that pulled without being seen, and they had been right, not immediately, not with perfect certainty, but slowly, over time, the evidence had accumulated, measurements taken carefully, observations repeated, patterns confirmed, until what had once been invisible became understood, even if it remained unseen. She appreciated that, the patience of it, the way humans had approached mystery, not with fear or urgency, but with curiosity and care. They had asked questions. They had made observations. They had proposed ideas and tested them gently over decades, over lifetimes, building understanding piece by piece. No one had demanded immediate answers. No one had insisted the universe reveal itself all at once. They had simply watched and wondered and trusted that time would bring clarity. And it had. She looked at the mapped paths again, the smooth curves, the predictable motion, the stars moving as though guided by something they could not see but could trust was there. She was doing the same thing now, watching motion, noticing patterns, understanding presence through effect rather than through direct observation. It was enough. She did not need to see the thing at the center to know it was real. The stars told her. Their motion told her. The gentle, patient bending of their paths around the empty space told her something was there, holding them, shaping their movement, providing the structure their orbits required. Knowing without seeing. It was not a new idea. She had encountered it before, in other contexts. Dark matter had been like that, understood through its effects long before anyone could point to it directly. Time dilation had been like that too, measured and confirmed even though time itself remained invisible. The universe was full of things that could not be seen but could be known, and that was fine. Seeing was just one way of knowing, not the only way, not always the best way. Sometimes you learned more by watching how things moved, by noticing what they responded to, by trusting that effects revealed truth even when causes stayed hidden. She stepped back from the console, her thoughts calm and unhurried. The data would still be there tomorrow. The stars would continue their orbits, and she would continue watching, learning, understanding piece by piece, without demanding the universe show her everything at once. After a while, she made her way through the corridors toward the small recreation area where she could sit quietly and let the patterns settle into her awareness. Chapter 3. What We Learned Slowly. She had found something in the ship's library that held her attention. Not new information exactly, but a record. A collection of observations made over time. Measurements taken by people she would never meet, in places she had never been. Years before she was born, Ari sat in the small recreation area, a screen resting on her lap. The ship was quiet around her. The lights were dim, casting soft shadows. She read slowly, without hurry, letting the information settle. The record showed how people had learned about places like the one she had been observing, regions where stars orbited empty centers, places where something massive existed without being visible. They had called them black holes. The term felt strange at first, not frightening, just unfamiliar. But as she read, she understood. Not holes in the sense of absence or emptiness, but places where mass had become so concentrated that even light could not escape its pull. Places where gravity shaped space itself. She let the concept rest without forcing understanding. She was simply absorbing, noticing what people had learned and how slowly they had learned it. The first observations had been tentative, uncertain. People had noticed stars moving strangely and had wondered why. They had proposed ideas, some correct, some not, and had tested them carefully over years, over decades. No one had rushed. No one had demanded immediate certainty. They had simply watched, measured, and refined their understanding piece by piece. She appreciated that patience, the willingness to sit with questions for as long as necessary, to let knowledge accumulate gradually rather than insisting it arrive all at once. And what they had learned was reassuring. Black holes were not chaotic. They were not unpredictable. They followed rules, the same rules that governed all motion, all gravity, all mass. They bent space and shaped time in ways that could be measured, predicted, understood. They were stable, ancient. Some of them had existed for billions of years, sitting quietly at the centers of galaxies, holding entire systems together through their gravitational presence. They did not wander. They did not hunt. They simply were, exerting their influence on everything nearby, shaping motion the way any massive object would. The records showed measurements, not frantic or urgent data, but calm, careful observations taken over time. Scientists had watched stars orbit these centers for years, tracking their positions, calculating their velocities, confirming that the motion matched what theory predicted. And it had. The stars moved precisely as they should if something massive were at the center. Their orbits were smooth, predictable, governed by gravity in ways that had been understood for centuries. She thought about how much humans had learned, not through fear or alarm, but through curiosity and patience. They had encountered something they could not see, and instead of retreating or panicking, they had leaned closer. They had asked questions. They had made tools to extend their senses. They had shared observations across generations, building understanding together. And what they had discovered was not a threat. It was a feature of the universe, a natural consequence of mass and gravity, something that helped shape galaxies, that anchored systems, that provided structure on scales so vast she could barely imagine them. Black holes were teachers, in a way. They had taught humans about gravity in its most extreme form. They had revealed how space could bend, how time could stretch, how mass could shape the very fabric of the universe. And they had done this without demanding anything. They had simply existed, patient and ancient, while humans learned to see them. She read a little more. The records showed that understanding had deepened over time. Early observers had known black holes existed, but had understood little about them. Later observers had refined that knowledge, measuring their masses, mapping their effects, confirming their predictions. And with each generation, the picture had become clearer. Not because black holes had changed, but because human understanding had grown. She found that comforting. The idea that knowledge could accumulate slowly, that it was fine to understand partially, that each piece of information added to a larger whole, even if the whole remained incomplete. You did not need to know everything at once. You could learn gradually over time, trusting that each observation brought you closer to understanding. Black holes had been patient teachers, and humans had been patient students. Together, they had built knowledge that was calm, measured, and reassuring. She closed the screen and set it aside. Her thoughts were quiet, settled. She did not feel overwhelmed by what she had read. She felt grounded, comforted by the scale of human understanding and the patience with which it had been built. The universe was vast. It contained things she would never fully understand. But that was fine. People before her had wondered about these same things, and they had learned enough to know that wonder did not need to become fear. Black holes followed rules. They were stable. They were predictable. They were part of the quiet order that held galaxies together. And that was enough. After a time, she rose and made her way toward the observation deck, where she could look at the region again, this time with a little more understanding and no less wonder. Chapter 4: A Very Quiet Center. She had returned to the observation window. The region of space she had been watching looked the same as before. Stars scattered across darkness, some bright, some dim, all of them moving in their slow, patient orbits around the center that held nothing visible. But now she thought about it differently, not because the thing itself had changed, but because her understanding had deepened. Ari settled into the chair, her body relaxing into its familiar hold. Her hands rested in her lap. Her breathing was slow and even. She thought about the words people used. Black hole. It sounded dramatic, like something that's swallowed or consumed, like a mouth opened wide in the darkness, hungry and dangerous. But that was not what it was. She let the misunderstanding settle, then released it. Words were imperfect. They tried to describe things that were hard to imagine, and sometimes they created fear where none was needed. A black hole was not a hole, not in the sense of absence or emptiness. It was the opposite. It was presence, concentrated mass, matter that had collapsed into a space so small and dense that its gravity shaped everything around it. It was not a vacuum cleaner, pulling things toward it indiscriminately. It was not hungry. It did not reach out and grab. It simply sat, ancient and still, exerting its influence the way any massive object would, through gravity, through the gentle bending of space, through the patient shaping of motion. Things fell into black holes the same way things fell anywhere else in the universe. Not because the black hole wanted them, but because that was how gravity worked. Objects moved toward mass. They followed the curves that mass created in space. And if they moved close enough and fast enough, they would spiral inward, following those curves to their natural conclusion. But most things did not. Most things orbited at safe distances, held in stable paths by the same forces that held planets around stars, moons around planets, galaxies in their slow rotation. The stars she was watching now had been orbiting this center for millions of years, perhaps billions, and they would continue orbiting for just as long, their paths unchanging, their motion predictable and calm. She thought about the center itself, the place where mass had become so concentrated that even light could not escape. Not because light was trapped or imprisoned, but because the gravity there was simply stronger than light's ability to move away. It was like trying to throw a ball into the air on a planet with immense gravity. The ball would rise for a moment, then fall back down, not because something was pulling it maliciously, but because the gravity was too strong for the ball's velocity to overcome. Light near a black hole did the same thing. It tried to move away, but the gravity curved its path back inward. Not violently, not chaotically, just inevitably, following the rules that governed all motion. She found that less frightening than fascinating. The idea that gravity could be so strong it shaped even light, that space itself could bend so deeply that paths curved back on themselves. It was an extreme version of something that happened everywhere. Every massive object bent space around it. Earth did, the sun did, even her own body did, though the effect was far too small to notice. Black holes simply did it more. Their mass was concentrated enough that the bending became profound, visible, measurable, but it was not chaos. It was order, extreme order. Gravity following its own rules to their natural conclusion. She let her gaze rest on the empty center, the place where something massive sat, quietly shaping everything around it. Not hungry, not dangerous, just present. It did not call out to her. It did not demand her attention or create unease. It simply was the way a mountain simply was, or a star, or the dark matter that held galaxies together. A feature of the universe, a natural consequence of mass and gravity, something that contributed to structure rather than destroying it. She thought about the word again, black hole. Perhaps it was the wrong word. Perhaps it should have been something else, something that conveyed patience instead of threat, stability instead of chaos. But words were what they were, and she could hold the concept gently, understanding it for what it truly was rather than what the name suggested. A very quiet center, a place of concentrated mass, ancient, stable, contributing to the order that held galaxies together. Not a threat, just a presence. And that was enough. After a while, she rose from the chair and made her way back through the corridors, her thoughts calm and settled, toward the galley where she could prepare something warm. Chapter 5: Curiosity Without Urgency. She had been sitting in the small recreation area for some time, her hands resting on her knees, her breathing slow and even. She was not doing anything in particular, not reading, not watching anything, just sitting, thinking, letting her thoughts move at their own pace. Ari thought about questions. There were still so many she did not have answers to, things she wondered about but could not know. Not yet, perhaps not ever. What did space look like at the very center of a black hole? What happened to matter when it crossed that boundary where even light could not return? Did time stop or stretch or move in ways she could not imagine? She did not know. The ship's records had told her some things, but they had also been clear about what remained unknown. There were limits to observation, boundaries beyond which even the most patient measurements could not reach. And she found that she was fine with that. The not knowing did not create anxiety. It did not demand that she search harder or think faster or find answers immediately. It simply sat there, a quiet acknowledgement that the universe was larger than her understanding and always would be. Curiosity without urgency. That was what she felt, the pull of wondering, but without the pressure to resolve. The awareness that questions could exist without answers and still be worthwhile. She thought about the people who had studied black holes before her, the scientists who had spent their entire careers observing, measuring, refining understanding. They had not known everything either. They had carried their own unanswered questions, and yet they had continued. Not because they expected to solve every mystery, but because the wondering itself mattered. Because each small piece of understanding was valuable, even if the whole remained incomplete. She appreciated that approach, the patience to sit with partial knowledge, the comfort in knowing that it was fine not to have all the answers. On Earth, she remembered, there had often been pressure to know, to understand quickly, to demonstrate certainty, but that pressure had never felt right to her. It had always seemed to miss something important. The value of sitting with questions, of letting them exist without forcing resolution. Here, in the quiet of the ship, moving through space far from anyone who might demand answers, she could let her curiosity rest. She could wonder about black holes and time and gravity without needing to arrive at conclusions. She could simply observe, notice, appreciate what she understood, and accept what she did not. That felt like enough. She thought about the black hole she had been watching, the quiet center with stars orbiting around it. She understood more about it now than she had before. She knew it was ancient, stable, predictable. She knew it followed rules. She knew it shaped motion through gravity rather than chaos. But there were still things she did not know, things no one knew, things that might remain unknown for a long time or forever. And that was fine. The black hole did not need her to understand it fully. It would continue existing whether she comprehended it or not, and she could continue observing it, appreciating it, wondering about it, without demanding that it reveal all its secrets. Curiosity was a gift, she thought, a quality that let you engage with the world, with the universe, without needing to control or master it. You could simply be curious, simply wonder, simply sit with questions and let them be. No urgency, no pressure, just the gentle, sustained awareness that there were things you did not know, and that was part of the beauty. She let her breath move in and out. The ship hummed softly around her. The universe continued its patient work, moving stars and galaxies and black holes through space in ways that were both understandable and mysterious. And she was here, held by all of it, comfortable with knowing and not knowing in equal measure. After a time, she made her way toward her quarters, where she could rest before the cycle turned again, carrying her forward through space and through questions that required no immediate answers. Chapter 6. Held by What We Understand. She had been thinking about structure again. Not the ship's structure, though that was always present, the beams and panels that held her safe, the systems that kept her alive, but the larger structure, the architecture of galaxies, the way things fit together across distances so vast she could barely imagine them. Ari stood at the navigation console, looking at a different view now, not just the region with the black hole at its center, but the broader context, the galaxy that contained it. The display showed thousands of stars, tens of thousands, maybe more, all of them moving, all of them held in a vast rotating system that had persisted for billions of years. A spiral like the ones she had seen before, with arms that curved outward from a dense center. And at that center, the data suggested, was a black hole. Not the one she had been observing. That one was smaller, quieter, tucked into a less prominent region. But this one was massive, ancient, sitting at the heart of the entire system. She let the image settle. The scale was hard to grasp. This black hole had more mass than millions of stars, and yet it did not dominate through chaos or destruction. It dominated through gravity, through the gentle, persistent pull that held the entire galaxy together. The stars near the center orbited quickly. The ones farther out moved more slowly, but all of them moved in response to that central presence. All of them followed paths shaped by the mass at the core. It was not a threat. It was an anchor. She thought about the word again, anchor. Something that held things in place, something that provided stability. Black holes did that. They sat at the centers of galaxies, not all galaxies, but many, and they helped maintain the structure. They kept stars from drifting apart. They shaped the rotation. They contributed to the order that allowed galaxies to persist across unimaginable stretches of time. Without them, things would be different, less stable, less structured. The galaxies might not hold their shapes as well. The stars might scatter more easily, but with them, the structure held, patient, persistent, ancient. She found that reassuring. The idea that something so massive and strange could contribute to order rather than chaos, that it could be part of what held the universe together rather than something that threatened to tear it apart. Black holes were not destroyers. They were builders in their way. They had helped create the conditions for galaxies to form and persist. They shaped the motion of billions of stars. They provided the gravitational scaffolding that allowed structure to exist on the largest scales. She thought about the dark matter she had learned about before, how it filled the spaces between stars, shaping motion, holding things together through its invisible presence. Black holes did something similar, but more concentrated, more localized. They sat at specific places, centers of galaxies, cores of dense regions, and they anchored everything around them. Both were invisible in their own ways. Both contributed to structure. Both worked quietly, patiently, without announcing themselves. The universe was full of hidden supports, things that held without being seen, forces that shaped without being felt directly, and she was held by all of it. The ship's gravity, the air she breathed, the dark matter that shaped galactic motion, the black holes that anchored systems, all of it working together, creating the conditions that allowed her to exist, to observe, to wonder. She did not feel small in a diminishing way. She felt held, supported, part of something larger that worked according to rules she could trust, even if she did not fully understand them. Black holes were part of that, part of the quiet order, part of the patient structure that held galaxies together across billions of years. She stepped back from the console, her thoughts calm and settled. The galaxy would continue its slow rotation. The stars would continue their orbits. The black hole at the center would continue its ancient, patient work. And she would continue moving through it all, held by forces she could trust, shaped by structures she could appreciate, even if she never fully comprehended their depths. It was enough to know they were there, working, holding, contributing to the vast, patient order that allowed everything else to exist. After a while, she made her way through the corridors toward the observation deck, where she could look out at the stars and feel the quiet presence of all the things she could not see but knew were there. Chapter 7, Stillness Over Time. She had returned to the observation window. The lights were dim, the way she preferred them, just enough to see the outline of the chair, the edge of the viewport. Everything else was darkness and stars. Ari settled into the chair, her body relaxing into its familiar hold. Her hands rested loosely in her lap. Her breathing was slow and even. The stars were still there. They had not changed. They would not change, not in any way she could observe. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not for thousands of years. Everything moved so slowly out here. She had thought about that before, but now she felt it more deeply. The black hole she had been observing, the quiet center with stars orbiting around it, had been there for so long, millions of years, billions perhaps, and it would continue being there, unchanged long after she was gone. The stars would continue their orbits, patient, unhurried, following the same paths they had followed for longer than she could imagine. Nothing rushed, nothing needed to. Time stretched out here in ways that made her own lifetime feel like a single breath, a brief moment in a process that had been unfolding since before Earth existed and would continue long after Earth was gone. But that did not make her feel insignificant. It made her feel part of something patient, something vast and slow and gentle. The universe did not hurry. It allowed things to happen at their own pace. Stars formed slowly. Galaxies turned slowly. Black holes sat quietly at their centers, shaping motion across timescales she could not comprehend. And she was here, held by all of it, moving through her own small span of time, while the larger processes continued around her, undisturbed by her presence, unaware of her observation, simply continuing as they always had. She let her breath move in and out, slow, steady. The ship hummed softly, its own rhythm, quiet and constant. She thought about change, how slowly it happened on these scales. The black hole had been there for billions of years, and it would be there for billions more, barely changing. The stars orbiting it had been following the same paths for longer than humans had existed, and they would continue following those paths long after humans were gone. Stillness over time, not frozen stillness, not the absence of motion, but slowness, so profound it felt like stillness. Motion so gradual it appeared unchanged. She found that comforting. The idea that not everything happened quickly, that some things persisted, patient and stable, across unimaginable stretches of time. The universe was not in a hurry. It did not demand immediate change or rapid transformation. It allowed things to unfold at their own pace, slow and gentle and calm. Her eyelids felt heavy, not from exhaustion, but from peace, from the deep settling that came from sitting with something vast and patient. The stars glowed softly, the darkness held them, and time moved so slowly it almost felt like it was standing still. Nothing changed quickly here, nothing needed to. After a time she did not measure, she rose from the chair, slowly, gently, and made her way back through the dim corridors toward her quarters, where rest was waiting. Chapter 8. Enough to Rest. Her quarters were dark, just the faint glow near the doorway, soft, distant. Ari lay on her sleeping pad, the blanket pulled up over her shoulders. Light, warm. Her body had settled. Her muscles had let go. The ship hummed quietly. She did not need to listen. It was simply there. Her eyes were closed. The darkness was the same. She noticed her breath. In, out, slow. She did not count, just felt it. The blanket was soft, the pillow cool. Everything was still. The ship carried her forward. The stars glowed somewhere. The black holes sat at their centers, ancient, patient, and she rested. Her thoughts had slowed, drifted without shape. The hum, the coolness, the warmth, in, out. Her breath continued, steady. She let go of the questions, let them rest too. There was nothing she needed to know, nothing to solve, just this, just breathing, just here. The darkness was soft. She felt her body sinking, settling. The ship hummed. Her breath moved. In, out. Everything was still. The universe continued, slowly, patiently. The black holes held their places. The stars moved in their orbits, and she was held too. The blanket, the air, the ship, the gravity, all of it there, in, out. Her body felt heavy, soft. Time passed, or did not. The ship carried her. The universe carried her, and she let herself be carried. Her breath slowed. In, out. The hum continued, quiet. The darkness gentle. Everything was still. The stars glowed, patient. Everything moved slowly, and she rested. Her breath in, out, soft, slow, still. The ship hummed, the darkness gentle. Everything continued. Quietly, slowly, black holes ancient, stars held, questions quiet, curiosity resting, enough to rest, enough.